Hello, everyone. How are you doing tonight? Can you do me a favor right off the bat? Let me know if you can see me and hear me. You can just send a quick message in the chat. You can just say, yes, what's up? How are you doing? Hey, there's Steph, Anna, Cayetana, Inez, Neil. Nice to see all of you. It's great to have you out tonight. We're going to be going over VR design secrets. It's going to be excellent. We're just going to give a couple minutes to make sure everybody can get in. We're looking pretty good tonight. Everybody's connected. We've got a lot of different people from a lot of different areas signing in, so thank you all for tuning in. Lots of we can hear you. You guys are great. Your feedback is awesome. Really giving me life tonight. Hello, Pamela. Hello, Hani. Carolyn. Bubba Gump. What a name. Hello. Jenny, Jade, hello, everyone, welcome. Super excited to get this kicked off. Give it a couple more minutes, and we'll be right into all the wonderful content. Hello from Virginia. Hello. Hello from Calgary. Munich. Awesome. Haven't been there in a few years, but I plan to go back at some point. And Greece as well. This is awesome. I love seeing where everybody's from. Indianapolis. Wow. We're truly global tonight. I'm loving it. The whole world. Eric travels a lot. Hello from Peru, Iceland, New York, Fargo, hello. Seattle, it's a good one. Ciao, hello, ciao from Rome, to you as well. All right, well, we're going to get kicked off in about a minute. Right before that, though, just a couple housekeeping things. You've all discovered the chat, which is fantastic. So you can throw whatever you want up there. You can add people if you have a direct message with someone. You'll also see at the top a questions tab. In there, that's where you can put your questions. I highly suggest putting them in this tab as opposed to the chat so that they don't get missed. We will address as many questions as we can at the end. So don't worry if you put them up now, we'll come back to it. You'll also see a tab for polls. The polls chat, that's for me. I'll throw out a couple polls throughout my presentation just to get some feedback on you guys, make sure that I'm really understanding what your needs are and how we can connect with you. So before we get into everything, I was going to ask you where you're from, but you've all done a great job of telling me where you're from. Like I said, I'm from Calgary. That's in Alberta, up in Canada. Tonight, we've also got some of our team from Toronto and from Seattle joining us. So yeah, hey to the fellow Torontonians there. But yes, it's great to see everybody joining us from around the world. That's absolutely wonderful. Miami, Fredericton, fantastic to have you. I will say as well, just for some of you that are in Europe, I know it's quite late right now. We do record this workshop, so you can definitely come back to it tomorrow. If it's getting a little late and you need to go to sleep, we totally understand. As long as you're registered, you will receive the link. And I'll just jump right in here. So what are we getting up to today? Well, I'm going to be with you for about 10 minutes, and then I'll pass you off to Eric, and he's going to take the next 45 or so. I'll conclude the presentation, and then we'll open the floor up for Q&A. So about myself, I am the community manager for CircuitStream. I've been working in tech and healthcare for about 5+ years. Previously, before CircuitStream, I was working with Arbor, which is a startup who is looking to align your values with your spending. So they're coming out with an app. Keep an eye out for that. Prior to them, I was with the Hunter Hub for Entrepreneurial Thinking. We supported entrepreneurs in accessing all the resources, organizations, and individuals that they needed to get their business off the ground. And before that, I was with W21C Research and Innovation, which sounds exactly like what it is, doing research and innovation in healthcare to improve pretty much everything medical that you can think of. Now I've joined CircuitStream, and I get to present to all you lovely people. And a fun fact about me, just in case you were wondering, is that I have an elvish tattoo. I am a very self-proclaimed nerd. I've loved Lord of the Rings since I was, oh God, probably 11 or so. Besides myself, though, you are also going to have Eric Carter tonight. He is your esteemed instructor. Eric has 10 plus years in game design experience, and he helped Microsoft develop hand tracking on the HoloLens 2. Fun fact about Eric is that he has 2 metal collarbones. He's also told me that he's got some like plastic mesh or something in him. So, you know, he's well on his way to becoming Vision from Iron Man. So when you think Eric, you can think Vision. That's how you'll remember him. And if you take away anything from tonight's workshop, hopefully it'll be this. As I mentioned, our team's kind of around the world. We've got Calgary, Toronto, and Seattle represented tonight. But as you can see from this very 2-scale map, we also have team members all over the world. We have 20 plus people working with us, experts from all different backgrounds, and they are in all different time zones, just like you guys. Circuitry is a Unity certified training partner. What does that mean? Great question. Training partners with Unity are approved based on their expertise, their focus on quality education, and their commitment to providing the highest level of training available. These are just a few of the companies that we've worked with. Our priority focus is education and training, and we've had the pleasure of working with all of these wonderful groups here. Everything from the US Navy to Walmart to Boeing to Facebook, Nike, Hershey's, who doesn't love chocolate, am I right? These companies are pushing the boundaries of tech development and are world leaders in cutting edge technology. It's an immense pleasure to contribute to the big things that they are accomplishing, and I definitely recommend that you check them out. So what do we know so far? Well, you know that Eric is part Android, CircuitStream is Unity certified, and we work with some of the best. But what does that look like? Let me give you a quick overview of our offerings so you can familiarize yourself. This is probably our flagship program, I would call it, within our education and training side of the business. This is our XR Development with Unity course. I'll get into this a little bit later tonight after Eric's presentation, but the TLDR is that it includes 40 hours of live education taught over a 10-week period, including live sessions as well as one-on-ones with our instructors. The next cohort for this course starts on December 1st. If you're looking at the XR development course and you're thinking, you know, I might want a little bit more of a base before I jump into that, you can definitely check out the C# scripting fundamentals in Unity. If you're thinking that you want to learn a little bit more about the scripting side of things, this is a great base. It's a 3-week short course, 12 hours of live class sessions over the 3 weeks, led by our instructors as well. If you're looking at these and you're saying, hey, I've already got a project on the go, I've got something that I'm building and I just need that little extra help, we've got our XR Project Accelerator. And this is designed to give you not only that 24 hours of live lab sessions, but also 24 hours of one-to-one mentor support to guide you through your project. So this is the perfect opportunity to polish your existing skills and bring them to the next level. Additionally, on top of our 3 courses, we also have one-to-one mentorship. Maybe you're a little too busy to take a full course. Maybe you just want to brush up on something a little bit after you finish the courses. You can definitely get in on the one-on-one mentorship. These are private sessions focused on technical support and accomplishing your XR project goals. So if you like what you see in tonight's workshops, we would definitely love to have you enroll in one of our courses. One quick note that I would like to mention before I keep going. In these workshops, as you've already seen, there's a lot of activity happening in the chat. If you're interested in keeping that chat going, you'd like to meet some of the people that were in the chat, you want to ask questions, you want to network, whatever, we do have a community Slack channel that you can join. The link is right there. We will also throw it up in the chat as well later this evening so that you can click directly into it. I'm going to throw a quick poll in here. This will be your first practice to see if you were paying attention earlier. If you click the polls tab, I'm just going to throw in there a quick one about what you're looking to use XR for. So you can fill that out at your leisure. The polls are going to be up throughout the whole workshop. So just take a minute there. And now finally, what are we going to learn tonight? The part you've all been waiting for, right? Tonight, Eric is going to walk us through realistic audio spatialization, virtual hands versus controllers, how to make either of them a perfectly natural extension of the user's body, He's going to walk us through how to optimize your per frame workload, as well as how to lessen teleporting disorientation. I think you all know that's something that everybody would love to learn more about. We're going to jump into a little bit of like what the heck is Unity, because we're going to be referencing it all throughout tonight. So another quick poll, this is your second practice. We just want to know a little bit on a scale of 0 to 10, how much Unity experience do you have? If you're listening to me say this and you're like, Unity experience, what the heck is she talking about? Just hit 0, that's totally fine. That just means you're brand new and this is a new concept. If you're looking at this and you're like, I'm 100% a 10, I know exactly what I'm doing, Unity is like old news. I mean, honestly, you should probably be up here with me and Eric tonight on this stage giving the presentation. Please just click that, and that will give us a really solid idea of where you're at in your learning. So what is Unity? Unity is a free 3D development engine for building games, simulations, and experiences. The easiest way, honestly, to begin making apps for XR is to use Unity. And just as a quick heads up, for those of you who don't know what XR is, it means extended reality. So that's just augmented reality, virtual reality. That's XR in a nutshell. Let's click through this. How would you use Unity though? So I can tell you all day what it is, but what does that mean? So basically you have your idea, which is the lovely light bulb. You have your idea, you'd go into Unity, you'd use Unity and Visual Studio to build out your idea. And then you push it through a software development kit into the relevant device that you are building for, which you can see along the side there. All right, well, I think we finally hit the point. I promised 10 minutes, it's been about that long. Today is an intro to VR design secrets. And so with that, I'm going to pass you off to Eric, our esteemed instructor, and he's gonna take it from here and blow all your minds with all of his wonderful design secrets. Welcome, Eric.
Thanks, Shay. Yes, this talk is coming straight to you from the Mind Stone. I did not know she was going to compare me to Vision before we kicked off here. So I am a VR designer, XR designer / AR designer. I come, as Shay mentioned, kind of from the games industry, and I've been applying my knowledge of building 3D simulations and delighting people to kind of the mixed reality space. I spend a lot of time at Microsoft working on HoloLens 2. I've worked for a couple different startups making different games. I worked for Facebook at Oculus, and recently you may have heard of Facebook Horizons. I was on that project for about a year. So now I'm super happy to be here teaching about design in the mixed reality space and kind of sharing all of the lessons that I've picked up from those different experiences with a bunch of great people like you. I teach some of the design elements in some of our courses, as well as shorter seminars and you know, some guest starring roles in other courses of the Circuit Stream grant. So with that, I'm going to dive straight into my presentation. We are going to be talking a little bit about you know, the different ways to polish a VR experience and kind of create a really powerful application that you can share with your users. And then after that, at the end, we're going to have a bit of a QA phase where you are free to ask me anything you want about basically anything MR related. Feel free to throw in questions about AR or how you can transfer these lessons to AR, or anything about specifically VR, how you can apply my talk. All of those are great options. So with that, why is this, hold on, my sharing is a little weird. It's like making this tiny for some reason. Let me try that again. How about this? That looks a little bit better. All right, so I'm here to talk to you about specifically what polish means. Like, I want to start with that idea of, like, you know, where's our goal and how do we define a good looking VR app, like a good experience in a VR app. And so when I think about polish, it's a really subjective term. It's something that A lot of people use it in a lot of different ways, and it's hard to come up with a good definition that applies to every VR experience or every 3D simulation. There's sort of it has to do with a feel. It's very like emotional, and it's kind of like something that is good and polished just has a certain soul to it, or like a mojo. There's some gestalt that comes together as a whole, and that it becomes better than just the pieces. There's that kind of feeling of like an extra sugar, that we have a secret sauce, and we come up with all these different words to describe kind of the right stuff and what makes it really pop. But all of these kind of come back to this idea of like quality, or like how do we create a quality app, some experience that very subjectively feels better than another app that maybe on the back of the box has the exact same feature list, but this app somehow is better quality. And so that immediately begins to take me to my favorite inquiry into values, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. This is one of the most influential books in my life. And it's sort of an exploration of like, what does it mean for something to be quality? And it uses the metaphor of maintaining a motorcycle, of like keeping this machine running and having a passion about a thing that you have a relationship with, this object that is both a form and a function, and somehow you derive pleasure and purpose out of. And one of the things that the author puts forward is that quality is inherently something that can't be captured in like a concise definition. It's not a thing that you can put in a box, but it's actually a way to perceive the world. And because of that, it's sort of this overarching big look at the way we relate to the world. So I want to kind of go with that idea of like, there's this subjective nature to quality and polish that in VR, it's a little easier to narrow down subjectively what those kind of experiences might be. And we can kind of see that in a trailer like this, where it's like, okay, I played Half-Life Alyx, like this game is really great, and like all those things falling out, like I subjectively experience quality in this app, and I know that it's good, but that doesn't really help us to take those lessons and build them into our own apps. So there must be like a little bit more of a precise definition that we can say a little bit better, that quality is something that, I don't know, you got to hear it, right? Because the trailer, the GIF doesn't really capture that this is a quality experience. We've all been fooled by a trailer. So maybe sound needs to be involved, but it's a little deeper than that. Like you really have to be able to interact and feel like you touch that VR experience, because it's not just a movie playing on YouTube that convinces you something's quality. It's almost like an emotional experience. But I would say, let's go one step farther and say the subjective experience of polish in VR happens in the convergence of all the user's engaged senses. So it's all of those subjective pieces, all of the things that VR headset is tricking us to experience out of this like fantasy reality that we live in. So it's really easy to tell the senses that VR engages. I mean, obviously vision, right? It's a VR headset that goes in front of your eyes and projects images into them. There are speakers there that you can engage your sense of hearing. There's also this kind of third sense we don't often think about, which is proprioception. And that's our body's ability to sense where our body is. So like when I move my arms, like my brain, even if I can't see them, they can be behind my head, I know where my hands are, and I can reach out and reach back and touch my hands here, even though I can't see them. So that's a sense that we don't often think of in our 5 primary senses, but it's something that VR can engage. As we track our hands, we track controllers, we track our head. That's an important part of kind of creating that illusion of immersion in VR. But VR also can kind of trick some additional senses. So VR doesn't completely get touch worked out, but there are some elements of texture. As I like move my controller over a surface, I can get some haptic feedback. There are ways that I can use vision to kind of give a sense of weight. Even though I am not actually physically picking up a heavy object, I can convey the idea of weight to somebody. And then finally, there's also our vestibular sense, right? That in my head, I have a little bit of water in my ear that when I move my head back around, sloshes, and I can feel that water sloshing in there. And it gives me a sense of momentum, or how I'm moving, or how my body is accelerating. So these are the 6 senses that it's important for VR to converge. And, you know, in maybe some future world somewhere where we can also trick the sense of taste and smell, those might become a piece of the future of VR. But in reality, like, all the time, I'm not really dealing with smell, because, you know, I can look out a window and see a beautiful blooming flower, and I don't smell that. So my brain is used to those things not being as synced up as these 6 things that VR engages. So just because we're using a sense, right? Just because we're putting some, you know, stimulus into your ears or into your eyes, doesn't mean that we really create a polished experience, right? There's a missing piece of my definition so far. Just because you see something doesn't mean it dazzles you. Just because you hear something doesn't make it harmonious. If you just, you know, maybe use touch controllers, but that doesn't make it feel like your body's in that space. So one more kind of iteration on my definition of a polished experience in VR is that it integrates satisfying interactions across multiple senses, right? So we still have that essential piece of like converging a bunch of sensory experiences together, but they're also satisfying experiences. So it's also helpful to kind of look at this the opposite, right? Like anti-polish, or the absence of equality experiences. These kind of rough edges. You know, we've all used software, played a game, or been in a VR experience that has some inconsistency, where maybe this knob on a cupboard signifies that I can open the cupboard, but then a knob on a drawer, I can't open the drawer. That's a frustrating kind of gap in functionality that makes me say this is not really a quality experience, because it doesn't meet my expectations for what this thing should be. In the same way, bugs that get in the way of my goals, or bad frame rates that give me sim sickness, or just like anything that frustrates my ability to achieve what I want to be doing in this experience, like those are all anti-polish that will knock down a good quality experience. So now we know our goal, right? We've built this definition of a quality experience is satisfying sensory experiences converged across multiple senses, right? So now let's learn a couple techniques. And these are the real secrets that let us pursue that goal of polish in our VR experiences. We're going to go through them, looking at those 6 different senses and understanding how to create a polished, satisfying experience for an individual sense. And then bringing those things together, that convergence is what makes things actually feel polished. So the first thing that all VR apps should do, and this is something that I think a lot of VR apps miss, because we don't often think about audio. It's not like our primary sense as human beings, that usually we're visual creatures, but the audio spatialization is really important. And so when I'm looking around the real world, I can hear very precisely, like if a sound is coming from over there, or a sound is coming from over there, maybe even a sound is above me. My brain is doing all of these things that have to do with not just the direction, and like when a sound comes from my right side, it hits my right ear, and then it goes across my face and hits my left ear. And that helps me to understand that, hey, the source of the sound is over there. But there's a lot more complex things going on that actually have to do a lot with sort of the shape of my head and the shape of my ears, that as that sound passes through my head, the pitch and tone of that sound is changing based on how it bounces around in the lobe of my ear. And, you know, it's not just going in my ear. There's also sound that impacts the side of my face and travels through the bones in my skull. And as they travel through the bones in my skull, that sound is distorted. And then it enters my other ear through my bones and not through the air that we usually think of sound traveling with. So everybody sort of has this different body, this different anatomy, but a lot of it is pretty basically the same. And so you can actually simulate the way that anatomy works via something we describe as a head-related transfer function. And so this is actually a microphone that is used to record it's called binaural sound. So it's like 2-ear sound. And down inside this rubber ear, there's a little microphone. There's another one on the other side. And this actually simulates the way sound hits a head and like transforms around it. And then comes in across the other side. So if you record with a microphone like this, you get very accurate sound that then you can project, say, through a set of headphones. And it sort of represents all of that kind of spatial location data that gets encoded in the sound wave itself as it travels around our head. But of course, if we record with the head-related transfer function already part of that source noise, then you can't move your head in VR. It's all very static. But luckily, we can do a bunch of cool math on the sound and take a normal mono-channel sound that is playing in our game engine somewhere, and then do the math to figure out how that sound changes as it passes around something like this head microphone via a HRTF plugin. And so that's just a simulation of the way sound moves. And it's not absolutely perfect. One of the interesting things about human heads is they're all different. And we all just kind of grow up learning a sense. We see a sound coming from somewhere, and then our subconscious brain figures out, oh, like that sound transformed as it moved across my head in a certain way. And we learn how to use our specific head to perceive the space that audio is happening in. But we don't have to be that accurate, because most heads are pretty similar. And so you can use an HRTF plugin to power your audio spatialization in VR. And so here are a couple examples of different plugins that provide audio spatialization. And by default, Unity, their kind of core audience, right, is like video games and simulations that run on traditional computers. And so they're just going to do stereo audio, or maybe even 7.1, where you don't have a truly spatialized sound space. You just have a couple different channels, and so you have some front and some back and some sides. But a spatialized audio is actually more accurate. You can get above, you can get weird angles. And so these three plugins, roughly, I think their capabilities are about the same. I would recommend just pick the one that is closest to the tech stack you're already using. In my demonstration, I'm going to show you how to install the Oculus Spatializer. I think it's actually been a while since I took these screenshots. But in Unity, it's super simple. Like, this is a really easy, straightforward step to totally up your audio game. You go to Assets, Import Package, pick a custom package here. I downloaded the Unity package for the Oculus native spatializer, and then you just pick this out of the import package screen, and then you have to go into your project settings in Unity, and you pick the audio section. And so right here is where I'm actually enabling the Spatializer plugin. The reason we have to do this is audio spatialization is a computationally intensive task. So if you're not going to use it, if you're just listening, if you're just playing a mobile game on your phone, or you're playing on your TV with your low quality little sound bar or whatever, it's not worth doing these calculations. But in VR, it's always worth it. And if your hardware is running a VR experience, your hardware is definitely capable of doing this spatialization for a totally reasonable cost. So we want to enable this plugin so that it actually starts doing the math to spatialize our audio for us. And then you also want to choose the ambisonic decoder plugin. These are both, you just pick whichever one you've installed. If it's the Microsoft HRTF plugin, pick that one. If it's the Oculus Spatializer, pick that one. So that's the first step. And that's basically every game engine. It'll have a different kind of like check the right boxes, move through. But that's the first phase of we want to turn this calculation on. Next, on every sound source, you can choose whether this specific source is spatialized or not. This is much more relevant in game development, because maybe you want to spatialize a sound that takes place in the environment, like a barrel falling down on the floor, but then you keep your UI interfaces in 2D space in stereo. But in VR, we don't have that same abstraction of this like 2D screen that things are happening in 2D in addition to 3D. So in all your VR experiences, you want to spatialize every single sound. One of the weird things about stereo is if you're in a spatialized environment and your brain kind of adapts to this idea that these are actual sounds coming at me from different directions. If you hear a single stereo sound, right? Stereo is just playing directly straight into two ears, left or right channel. Your brain begins to perceive that like in the center of your head. And so that's a really disorienting kind of strange negative experience. It's that anti-polish, right? The inconsistency that takes us out of the experience. And so every single application in your or every single sound source in your application needs to both have the spatialization turned on and take the spatial blend all the way to 3D. So this blend here, most spatializer plugins will allow you to choose a blend between entirely stereo, which is 2D audio, and entirely 3D. The only application that I can really see this in VR is maybe if you have somebody talking to you over a radio or something, and you always want to know kind of what direction they're coming from, but you kind of need to be able to hear that regardless. So if they're really far away, they're talking to you over a radio, so you're still hearing them. But unless you're doing some kind of very special thing like that, 100% 3D all the time. The other important thing to do, so now we've turned on audio spatialization, but there's another important step, which is tuning where the audio comes from. So in this case, I've just thrown in a default mesh of a guy, and I put an audio source on that mesh, and it just so happens that the origin of this mesh, the very center of it, is right here in the center of the model. And so when I'm standing in front of this in a video game, you know, it's kind of fine, whatever the sound is coming out of this direction, and it works. But when I'm in VR, and I'm standing in front of this model and I hear this guy's voice coming from his crotch, that's very disorienting. You don't want his voice sound to be coming out of someplace like that. So you want to create some child object so that you tune the source of that location, not just to the game object, but to the very specific spot where that sound is being emitted from. At the same time, maybe if you have this character snapping their fingers, if that sound comes out of their mouth, when you're using an audio spatialization plugin, your users will be able to tell that snapping sound is coming from that person's mouth. And that's a weird, inconsistent, strange experience to be had. You want to have a second audio source that's on that mesh's hand for that other kind of sound generation. So as summary, no stereo signs, new stereo sounds. We don't want to have any like 2-channel audio. We want to have all our music, all of our sound effects spatialize. You know, I actually had I was working in a game jam, and the audio person I was working with made this great background track, and I kind of was like, I don't know if we can use that. It was early days of VR. I didn't really understand how to put music overlaid, and I knew we were going to use audio spatialization. And when he first set it up, it was just playing in stereo. And it was a really disorienting experience because you essentially had this music playing in the center of your head that wherever you looked was equally the same sound, and it was just following you around. And I spent the whole weekend thinking like, man, this guy made this whole like 5-minute track and I'm gonna have to take it out and I feel really bad. And I kept thinking like, how do I get background music into VR? And then I realized there was a stereo in our level, and I was like, oh, I'll just put this music coming out of this speaker. And it immediately made so much more sense in VR. And when you walked away from the speaker, just like in the real world, that music got quieter. And when you walked closer to it, it got louder. And that was a great solution. And it's sort of like it taught me that when I want to use some menu sound or some abstract thing that doesn't exist in the real world, I need to find a diegetic source, some source that's in the narrative, something that I can believe that sound is coming from. Another powerful lesson I learned from this is like, if you have a narrator who's giving objective text, actually put that objective sound, have that sound come from the thing that the user needs to be doing. So if there's a dial they need to turn, have that narrator say, turn this dial, and have that sound come from the dial. That's a really powerful way to draw the user's attention via sound. So we want to enable HRTF spatialization, locate those sounds to draw the user's attention in the right places, and don't use any stereo audio. Let's move on to vision. This is kind of like the powerful primary way that humans experience the world. It's a really great way to express our ideas in VR. So one of the most common mistakes that I see a lot in VR apps is something called a near clip plane that's too close. So when we're rendering 3D graphics, you can kind of think of this as there's this camera in the lower left, and we do some matrix transformation to take all the geometry that's out in this space, and then we flatten it down onto this kind of surface. The same way that our eye collects light from 3D space and projects it on the flat back of our eye, or you can also think in a camera, you have a lens that projects light onto either film or a digital light capture chip. And that represents a mathematical transformation that happens in 3D rendering. It's also like a physical transformation that's actually happening to light as it collides with that flat surface. So by default, game engines have kind of tuned this math in such a way that you put it inside a character's head that's about 2 meters tall, and the front of their face is sort of, you know, where the near flat surface lies on. But when we work in VR, we're actually sort of at a different scale where it's much more like eyeball scale. And in a video game, when you walk up to a wall, usually it stops about here. It never gets inside your field of view, like in a way that messes up the rendering. So, but in VR, a lot of times everything that's happening is happening right in front of the camera. And so by default, when you're using a game engine camera, this near clip plane, this flat surface that all of the 3D geometry, all the light is being projected on, and thus creating the image that actually shows up on that screen, you can actually get geometry behind it. And so any light that is coming in to this mathematical projection, like doesn't hit the object because it's behind your near clip plane, behind this flat surface. So one of the most important things we can do in VR is shrink our near clip plane. And essentially what we're doing is like scaling down a camera from like the size of our head to the size of our eyeballs, right? And each one of those is a little tiny thing. The math is essentially the same, but it's just a way that you can tune sort of how your game is optimized, how your 3D simulation is optimized. And what this does is it prevents you from picking up an object and bringing it up to your face. If it goes behind that near clip plane, it disappears completely. And that's, again, a really disruptive thing that ruins your experience. So I recommend in most game engines a near clip plane of 0.1 meters. That puts it somewhere around the front of your eyeball if you're actually like comparing it to human anatomy. And then, so here's how you can, in the camera in Unity, there's clipping plane, and so the near plane, 0.01. I think I maybe quoted the wrong decimal when I said that just now, but 0.01 is a great number to use for a near clip plane. And every game engine is going to have that kind of tuning in their rendering system. The next thing, so it's important to think about something called Texel density. So if you know anything about rendering 3D art, you know that we are stretching a flat image across some 3D meshes. And depending on how much we stretch that image, it can get blurry like this. And so this is something that's called low Texel density. And basically it means is we're taking a small number of pixels in that image and we're stretching that texture out over a big space. And the result is kind of this blurry mess. That actually can make people sick. They kind of perceive it as like some hallucination or something, and their bodies are like, I must have eaten some bad berries, I need to throw up. So that's an important optimization. It comes up particularly in VR on mobile because there's not a lot of memory, so a lot of times we try to use very small texture space. Another thing is we need to keep high frame rate. So frame rate is like how often per second an image is updated. And so this is kind of a like slowed down, overly dramatic demonstration, but you can see there's a smoothness to the animations on the right that the animations on the left doesn't really have. This creates a kind of lag. And again, when we perceive that lag as our reality, our brain can only interpret it as like some kind of hallucination that is probably caused by drugs or something bad we ate, a sickness. And so we have this physiological like purging response of like, I need to fix this reality distortion by throwing up. And so that's a really negative experience for your users that you want to avoid. So keeping high and consistent pixel density, shrinking the near clip plane, getting a good solid frame rate, all important parts of the vision. We also want to keep the latency between where I move my head and what I'm seeing through those 3D renders as short as possible. So I'm going to cover that in the next section when we talk about late updates of hands. You also want to be late updating your camera position in order to reduce latency there. So let's start talking about hands. Let's talk about proprioception and what it means to feel like my body is in this space. So there's a really important idea of like hey, I have this hand. Sometimes when it interacts with things, like I need some kind of visual to tell me where my body is. And it's like part of the way I perceive my body is seeing it, but also feeling it. And so we need some kind of avatar hands, whether those are controllers or hands, or in this case, you pick up a tomato and the hand disappears, but you still see the tomato. That gives you some indication of where you are relative to the virtual world around you. That's a really important way to ground people in your simulation. It's also really important that when you are rendering a frame in a game engine, there's a whole lot of stuff going on. You see in this picture, there's like some things back here hovering up and down, some animations playing, some physics going on. It's really important to take your hands, like you have this thing to sync up, right? It's like where I see my hands are and where my proprioception tells me my hands are. And those things need to line up as closely as possible. But my hands can move so fast that in the time it takes to render a single frame of video, my hand can have moved far enough that where I feel it being and where the rendered video is are out of sync. And so it's really important to query your tracking, your hand tracking, at the last possible moment before you draw that hand avatar, that tomato or whatever, to the screen. And so the way we do that is called a late update. And basically it updates all of the animations, all the physics, everything else in the scene. And then very last, it checks that tracking hardware and says, okay, where's the hand now? And the way you do that in Unity is on a tracked pose driver. You just choose update type update. This does it during the update loop and right before the render. In Unreal, this is in the late update function. And as you might expect, don't put everything in the late update because that just prioritizes all things, and then nothing is prioritized, essentially. You're just doing everything late. Just put your hands in your camera positions and anything that maybe you're holding in your hands and then thus needs to stay synced up with your hands in the late update step. The next important piece is different VR controllers have a different like center point. And so I'm sure you've all started up some VR experience and it feels like your hand avatars are like slightly rotated, or you're like holding your hands by the wrist or something. That's because different VR devices have a slightly different rotation. And so this is an example of the script that we have at CircuitStream where different VR controllers actually have different offsets and different rotations. I would love if game engines or platforms or something just kind of sorted this all out for you, but they don't. So it's important that if you support multiple platforms, and you should, that you actually adjust the position of your art to correspond to the particular controller that your users are using. And different controllers not only have different kind of rotations and centers, they also have different grips. So like a wand might be sort of a vertical thing that you hold, whereas an Oculus controller maybe is more of like a forward angled kind of gun grip. So important things to keep in mind. As you get closer to this and as you align your hand meshes to your actual physical hand, you'll notice that there's actually kind of an uncanny valley there, where once it gets close, you realize it's not quite right and it makes you uncomfortable. One of the things you're probably noticing is we spend almost our entire lives with basically the same sized hands. And then you go into VR and you're like, oh, this is weird. Like my hands are way too big or way too small. The only way that I found to get around that and kind of get past that discomfort is to offer 3 or maybe 4 different hand sizes as an option. You can also sort of like trick that by maybe putting gloves on your character. So like if I'm wearing some big gauntlets or boxing gloves, I don't get that same disconnect of my hand size being wrong. I just think that the gloves are a bit thicker or thinner based on how big I perceive my hands to be. And then finally, one of the important kind of tricks, so this goes a little bit counter to what I was saying before of like we have to line up our vision with our proprioception. But our proprioception actually is sort of like a low resolution sense. Like I can't really tell the difference between here and here, but I can kind of perceive some messed up difference if I reach out and grab a handle. and then I like say open that door, I'm expecting my hand to follow sort of this perfectly smooth track of the door's hinges, right? And if I actually do this in VR, right, I'm not actually holding a door. So my hand just kind of inaccurately moves up and down in this weird pattern. If I see that in the virtual world, I feel disconnected. I feel detached from that door. And so we can do a little bit of trick actually and sync up the position of your hand within some small margin of like 2 or 3 inches so that it's perfectly aligned with those joints or that handle or whatever I'm trying to hold that doesn't move freely with my hand. And that actually gives me a better sense of alignment between where I see my hands in the world and where I intend my hands to be. So this is another good way to like kind of push that final bit of proprioception to visual expectation alignment. So good hand presence. We want to show those hands in VR, having some late updates on late updating the hand art and any held objects so that it stays aligned even through the period of rendering that particular frame. Aligning the hands on each controller is super important. Scaling the hands art and geometry matching are great ways to give a really satisfying proprioception experience. Finally, let's touch on texture and weight and explore the ways that we can create that in VR. So we can't actually create weight because we're not actually like, controllers don't change their weight. We're just waving around in space. But physics and audio can go a long way to kind of tricking the way our brains work. And so I watched this trailer of this giant log falling out of a tree on Reddit. And to me, this was the best video that ever captured a sense of heaviness. And it's even better with the sound on. I can't do that in my presentation, but I will link this video at the end, and you'll get it in your emails later. I highly recommend anybody who's doing this kind of work should go watch this video and just learn the way that this tree moves and the thud and the sound of it and the way it kicks up dirt and those like particles flying in the air. They give this illusion of weight and the way that it begins to fall slowly and then just plummets and thumps. These are great tricks to use to give these objects some sense of realness that, again, reconnects people and immerses them with their simulation. So another really important thing I want to talk about is using proper grip types. So in the real world, we basically only hold one way, right? I put my hand around a thing and it's in my hand and they are always synced up. And if the thing is heavy, my hand just moves slower with it. Unfortunately, that's not really how the real world works or how VR works, because I never actually pick up a heavy object. I just swing my hands around as fast as I can swing them around. And so we need to kind of simulate that experience in order to simulate weight in VR. So the first kind of grip I want to talk about is something I call a socket grip. And basically this is useful for something that has sort of like a handle or something that is only held in a particular way. And so you can see in this video how I grab this knife blade in a way that doesn't make any sense. Like I grab the sharp part, right? But then it snaps into my hand and is held in a smart way. This is a way to help users connect with a physical space that's not their native real world. It's like some simulation that may or may not be accurate to the way their body actually moves. The next one I want to talk about is something I called a fixed with physics grip. And so this is, you can see that this wand that I'm carrying is, sorry, my slides have just messed up a little bit. This wand that I'm carrying doesn't, it stays attached to my hand. And so it's fixed, right? That's the fixed part. But it still has physics. It can still interact with this mannequin as I push it. But the mannequin doesn't interact back with the wand. So that's kind of an important step for understanding that. The next piece is something that this video, I would call this fixed. Sorry, my slides are jumping around. Fixed with an infinite constraint. And so in this video, you can see that the thing actually moves. Sorry, I don't know why my videos are jerking around like this. This actually moves with my hand, like it kind of twists out. And so this gives a sense that this thing exists more in the real world than in my hand. And it has a certain weight and it's pushed by the mannequin. So you can see the mannequin seems a lot heavier in this case, that it's actually manipulating the sword in my hand. So in most cases, I wouldn't say that a sword is a great example of where you would use this infinite constraint. I would use this for you know, something like maybe a coffee cup where you set it on a table, but you don't want it to go inside the table. You want it to move away from your hand if your hand accidentally penetrates that table. A sword is actually something much better with the fixed with physics, because then it sort of becomes an extension of my arm. The way we think about that is a little bit different. So then finally, it can be helpful when you are using a constraint like that, where the thing you're holding moves away from your hand, to create some kind of presence for where your hand actually is, in addition to where that held object is. And so you can use a kind of tomato presence there, where you have this ghost skeleton. And so that allows you to maybe have your hand avatar not go into a wall, right? You can have a more realistic interaction between the art for your hand and you know, those things in the world, like walls or handles. But if your hand moves deep into that wall, you feel disconnected, because you have this proprioception problem again, right? But if I create some other secondary avatar via some ghost or some skeletal hand, that keeps my proprioception aligned and keeps the art for where my hand is consistent with the world. So we kind of satisfy both of those desires. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about limited constraints. And so in this video, you can see that when I pick up this heavy barrel with one hand, the constraint breaks, right? At a certain point, like, the barrel is too heavy for me to pick up with two hands. But I can also pick it up with both hands, and then the strength of both of those physics constraints actually lifts that barrel. And by understanding the weight of this thing based on when my grip breaks, that corresponds to something in the real world, right? If I tried to pick up a 55-gallon drum like this, at a certain point, my fingers would just uncurl, because I'm not strong enough to pick up a 55-gallon drum one-handed. As a bonus, geometry matching can also help with these grip types and help create a sense of weight. That, like, as I grab something heavy, my hands actually can, like, the art for my hands can actually bend down and kind of slow that lift. And it gives me the sense that when I pick up something heavy, I move slower. And so that's a trick we can use for geometry matching, and use that the low resolution nature of proprioception to help sort of the high resolution visual perception of weight. So good physics and audio, good proper grip types, those will give a sense of texture and weight, that as the art for your hands, the avatars for your hands move with those things, you get a greater sense of that kind of in your conscious mind. And finally, we'll touch briefly on sort of vestibular motion. So people get sick when you move them. That's a thing that is essential about VR, and we need to avoid that. So that's a bad piece. But at the same time, it's really important for people to understand where they're going before they arrive. This is true of any kind of transportation, whether it's teleporting or smooth movement or any of that. And so this teleport, you could see it's okay. Like, I instantaneously travel over there, so I don't get a misalignment between my vestibular system and my visual system that caused the sickness. But I just appear in this place. And even in this GIF, it's kind of disorienting that, like, you go from this big open white cement space and you appear up against this yellow wall, and you have a lot of, like, cognitive processing to think where you're going, even though this really great teleport diagram shows you where your play space is going to land, shows you where your body is going to be in the play space. This is a sort of a best example of how teleporting can teach you where to go. But there's also another technique you can use for transport, and that's vestibular deception. So vestibular deception is any time that you stimulate our vestibular senses in a way that tricks it into thinking that you're moving. So this is an example from Cosmic Trip, where the way locomotion works is it actually renders you traveling from this place to this other place, which normally would make a lot of people sick, right? Because their vestibular system is saying I'm not moving, but my visual system is saying I am moving, and so that breakdown, that reality distortion, triggers our poison response. But in this case, you'll notice that the player, in order to enter this portal, has to take a step forward. So you're actually creating some vestibular simulation, right? Like I feel my head moving forward as I take that step, as I travel through virtual space. And even though there's a little bit of misalignment there, right? You're traveling hundreds of feet, but you only are actually taking a single step forward. There's enough similarity there that you have deceived the user's vestibular system into thinking this is motion, this is okay, don't worry, I'm not poisoned. Any technique that deceives your vestibular system this way can be helpful, because not only do you see where you're going and understand at every moment of this transition, you kind of know where you are, and you can update your mental map of where you are in this virtual space as you go. So that's right. We said the second piece is I want to understand where I arrive before I get there. So the best combination of these things that I've seen is space traversing teleport in Facebook Horizon. And unfortunately, I logged in to get a video of this, and space traversing teleport was broken. So we're just going to have to use our imaginations here for a second. So the way space traversing teleport works is it actually takes time for you to move through from where you are to the destination. And so you can imagine that in this GIF of the labs teleport, you see that ring where you're going to end up, and you see the arc of where you're traveling. Your vision fades to black, but the arc and the ring stay visible when you fade to black. And then that arc and ring slides towards you. And in the time it takes you to quote unquote travel to that destination, you've seen that ring slide to eventually under your feet. And that gives you just enough information to update your mental map of where you are in this space and understanding this 3D space moving around you. But I found that it doesn't actually trigger a sense of mismatch between your vestibular and your vision systems, because somehow your primal lizard brain thinks of this as the ring moving towards you instead of you moving through space, even though your conscious spatial brain is updating your mental map of that space as you go. So super powerful form of teleport that I would love to see in lots of new experiences that maybe perhaps some of you are building. And this is also, there has a second added benefit of it gives travel time moving through a space, which makes space seem a lot more meaningful and is a lot more of a useful connection when you have multiple users moving through the space. That instantaneous travel through teleport can be really disorienting for other people. So the goals with tricking your vestibular system, you have to hide the motion via a fade to black, or perhaps some peripheral vision blinders, because the sickness actually comes from our peripheral vision. Maybe using vestibular deception to help hide some of that mismatch. And then we also want to balance that with providing different references for the motion that you're moving the person through. So in summary, quality, polish, it emerges from satisfying interactions converging across multiple senses. And it happens in the absence of rough edges that disrupt that. Polished VR converges our sense of vision, our sense of hearing, our proprioception, our kind of the touch aspect of texture and weight, as well as our vestibular sense of motion. There are some additional resources in my slides. You'll get a copy of this slide later. I kind of breezed over geometry matching really fast. Carrie Davis has a great talk about doors and how your hands sync up with doors in Half-Life Alyx. That's a great watch. Alchemy Labs also came up with the idea of tomato presence and how important that is. They have a great GDC talk about how they use tomato presence in Job Simulator. And finally, a link to that Reddit post where the full video of that tree falling with the audio and everything is available. Highly recommend watching that and really thinking about the way that that conveys weight in a medium that it's entirely virtual. Finally, I have some research recommendations for some of the best individual senses. Check these out. Play these experiences. They'll teach you a lot about creating a polished experience. While you do, you should make some lists. Think about things that bothered you in those experiences and things that feel like magic. And as always, you could hear more from me on my Twitter, Ekna. I also have a VR design list with a bunch of cool people that I follow that you can see all of the great things that other people are doing that I'm interested in. So up next, I'm going to pass this off to Shay, and she's going to do a little bit of wrap up about some of the things that CircuitStream is doing, and then I will be back for a Q&A. I will go through the questions poll and start answering the ones that have the highest upvoted interest. So, upvote those questions that you want to see answers for, and we will touch on whatever topics you want to talk about. So there we go, Shay. Give them your best.
Thanks, Eric. I hope you all enjoyed that. Double checking, you can still see me and hear me. Hit me with a quick yes in the chat, just so that I know I'm not alone on my camera. Thanks, Luke. Thanks, Steph. Good to know. So a couple more things for me to cover real quick. What I would like to hear from you right now is just a quick scale of 0 to 10. How did you feel about this workshop? You'll see it in the polls tab again, third from the left. If you could just tap a number there, that would be fantastic. So Eric covered quite a bit of stuff in there, and I know I learned something. I hope you guys did too. I want to share with you a couple things here, some testimonials. As I mentioned earlier, we have a number of courses, we have a number of workshops. We hope that you check out all of the workshops. We hope you join us for our courses. Whether you are looking to upskill, or you're part of an organization looking to integrate the technology, or you're looking for professional team training, whatever it might be, we literally have something for everyone. We've had students go on to obtain jobs with Unity. We've had students successfully build their own apps. And most recently, we actually had 2 students who received Oculus scholarships to grow and scale their apps with Oculus. So we'll just tap through really quick. I'm just going to remind you of the course offerings. As I said earlier, C# scripting fundamentals in Unity. This course is an excellent intro to scripting. It's 3 weeks long. Starting November 9th is the very first cohort. You'll get 9 hours of live sessions plus office hours. If that is something that you are already familiar with and you're thinking I need a little bit more, the XR development with Unity course, our next cohort is December 1st. This course, like I said earlier, 40 hours of live session training plus one-on-one training with our instructors. You get weekly one-on-one support for your project. You will go over C# fundamentals in this course as well, just slightly quicker than you would in the C# course itself. No experience required. You definitely can come in. If you're a newbie, have no fear, like the slide says. It's true. It's very, very true. If you're thinking, no, I am, pro at C#, I've already started working on my project, the XR Project Accelerator, this is your jam. You get 24 hours of live sessions. You also get 24 hours of one-on-one support, 21 hours with instructors like Eric to work on your project and bring it to the next level. I don't know. I think I would pick that if I had my own project, which hopefully soon I will. For all of those courses, we do offer a payment plan. We have 3, 6, and 12-month increments. As you've probably noticed, we've got a number of our staff in the chat today. We've got Steph, we've got Kyle, we've got Vlad. They're all course leads. So if you have any questions about any of the courses, any of the payment plans, please do reach out to them. And if you enjoyed tonight's workshop, then we definitely would love to see you in one of our courses. And finally, if you just need to learn some more, maybe you got to run, can't stick around, you can always hit up our website at circuitstream.com/learning. And you can also check us out in our community Slack channel, which I mentioned earlier. This is the Slack. You can see it right there on the slide. We will also be sharing it via email, so you can join us there. If you want to keep talking to the people that you've met here, you want to talk to us, you want to ask questions, you want to network, whatever it is, come join us in the Slack. We post things regularly, and it's all very interesting. And now, Eric, I'm going to call you back for the Q&A. We're at 6 o'clock, so we've got a little bit of time. We can hopefully get through most of your questions. Like I said, though, if we don't, please bring your questions to the Slack and we will do our best to answer them there. Eric, join me. If not, we'll get him to answer maybe in the chat. There we go. Jayan's sharing the Slack group, so you can also click the banner at the top if you would like to join right now. Let's take a look here. What have we got in questions? Oh, we've got some good ones. Okay. App design flow look like? It's a good one, Anil. And non-coding positions are good to get hired at VR companies. Hi. I'm a non-coding position, I would say. As community manager, I get to do this. I get to hang out with you lovely people. I also get to manage social media. I get to send out all sorts of fun emails. And, you know, it's definitely not something that requires coding. Does that mean that I'm not interested in coding? No, I definitely am, and I plan to learn. But you can definitely start working with a VR, AR, XR company without any coding background. You just probably wouldn't be in a development position. And Eric's rejoined us. Eric, I already answered one of your questions for you.
Good job. You can mark that one as answered right now.
Yes. Let me scroll through here.
Sorry to leave you hanging.
No, that's okay. I was happy to answer the question. Let's go for this one.
Yeah. What does my VR app design flow look like? That is a great question. I think a lot of this varies based on kind of the scope of your project, how much time you have to throw at an idea. I always kind of begin with some pure ideation that like a lot of times when I work on something, I'll just like put down my computer, put down all of my devices, and I just go for a walk, and I'm just walking around outdoors, and I'm thinking about what do I want to achieve, what I want to capture, what would delight me. The other day I was actually walking in a park and I was looking at these animals, and I thought it'd be great to make an AR app where I actually get to place where the animals go. And that was part of a curriculum that I was developing. And so that idea became one of the things that we're going to teach in the HoloLens course. And so to me, that's a really essential place to get away from, you know, the practicalities of building it and just get that free like imagination time where I'm thinking about my objectives and the problem space, but generating a lot of ideas. And I do that alone. I don't do that with other people. I'm not a big believer in like group brainstorming. I think it's much better to be creative and flow on your own. And then from there, it becomes a process of like communicating that idea to other people and getting their buy-in, getting them to believe in those ideas. And a lot of times that means mock-ups or demonstrations or prototypes. And ultimately that process of design going to higher and higher fidelity kind of realizations of that idea is the entire process of design. At a certain point, you stop convincing your coworkers or your backers or your funders or whatever, and you're convincing your user to believe in this design. So that process begins in my head and then becomes words and then often becomes text on a page and then becomes images and then maybe like GIFs or video mock-ups, and then it becomes, you know, 3D prototypes. So the video I showed of the different grip methods, so that's actually a VR template in Unreal called VR Expansion. And it has a lot of useful tools for prototyping like that. So I could just click through a bunch of different objects and apply those different grip settings and kind of convey those ideas really fast. So that's a way that I then, you know, move to the next step in that process. That, you know, you saw, if you're familiar with the default art for meshes, those hands that you saw are just the default Unreal hands in every VR project. So getting to those higher fidelity things as fast as possible, super useful. But in a way, like, this is sort of a artistic space, like, right, you come up with your own process, you explore it your own way, and you get to spreading your belief about what something should be to other people. And however you can do that the best is how you should do that.
Thanks, Eric. Next question. Let's take a look here.
We can hit this one real fast.
Yeah, sure.
The Oculus Spatializer is not included with the default Unity Oculus integration. Last time I checked, it's its own package, because there are some places where spatialization is applicable outside of VR. So some of those exist as separate packages. There's also kind of a corollary of like, well, which one of these should I use? And choosing your SDK is a pretty complex question, but it's useful to think about where you want to distribute and what kind of hardware you want to target. The Steam VR framework, OpenVR, is a great place kind of as a default to go because it's available. It supports multiple headsets and multiple marketplaces. And if you're using the OpenVR kind of tech stack, I would bring along the Steam VR HRTF because it just is going to kind of mesh together a little bit easier. You can always mix and match. You can use the Microsoft HRTF plugin as well. But I've just found that, you're going to find more documentation and tutorials and processes and fewer bugs if you're using kind of that golden path that everybody's on. And so if you're mixing and matching, like, you're kind of on your own adventure there. Same deal if you're developing for HoloLens. The Microsoft HRTF plugin is sort of like, they are all using that in MRTK. All the Microsoft projects are using that. So you're going to find an easier time kind of keeping those things in line. But maybe you're targeting Quest as your primary platform. It might be easier to just directly target the Oculus integration. You get a little more cutting edge features like hand tracking. If you want to include hand tracking in your app and also ship on Steam, you're going to have to bring both of those SDKs in because only the Oculus integration at this point offers a hand tracking support. So on your Quest build, you'll be targeting at least part of the Oculus SDK for your hand tracking. And on your Steam build, you'll be hitting the OpenXR framework, but then you'll not support hand tracking because OpenXR doesn't support hand tracking yet. So those are a lot of things to keep in mind, but it's a deeper technical question that you kind of have to explore about, like how, which SDK is right for you and how to implement. Talk to your engineering team. Any engineering buddies you have, they're going to have a lot of opinions about that.
Okay, let's take a look. So many good questions. How about this one here?
What if VR controllers have built-in sound, like a PS4 controller has a speaker in it? I think that speaker in a PS4 controller is really cool. And I've seen a lot of really great experiences that kind of surprisingly come out of the light bar and the sound source coming out of the controller. But part of the reason why those are really cool is because that's the only way that you can get this entirely separate audio channel that, like when you're playing on a PlayStation, all your audio mostly is coming out of the TV, or even if you have 7.1 around you, it's sort of this distant experience. Whereas the controller making the sound itself is a very novel, sound source in that setting. In VR, however, the way people experience sound is already immediately different, right? Because we're talking about spatialized audio all around you. Spatialized audio doesn't work well off of speakers that are like in the room, right? Because you're hearing not only the mathematical transformation of HRTF, but you're also hearing a second level of HRTF of that sound moving through the room and over your head. There's also another layer of kind of transformation that's happening to the sound as it bounces around your physical space. So audio spatialization is really only for sort of headphone settings. And so like the Quest has little speakers that are right next to your ears, or you're wearing headphones for that VR experience. So in that context, you can make it sound like a sound is coming from anywhere, including from where your hands are. So there's no reason to actually have to emit sound from the controller, because you can just use the HRTF transformation to make it sound like the sound is coming from the controller or whatever you have in your hand. So I don't think that that is necessarily like a useful investment in hardware. Put a piece of sound producing, like a speaker inside a controller, when we can simulate that based on the headset, that like the sound, the headphones that are built into the headset. So probably not beneficial. We're probably not going to see that technology, but it is useful to locate sound sources in Spatialize audio on your hands, because that will make it seem more realistic if you're holding something in your hand and you hear it coming from that space.
Also, anything catching your eye in there? Do you want me to pull another one for you, Eric?
Sunny asked, what are some of the best apps and games? Like we mentioned, that last slide in my presentation will come out to your email. Feel free to check them all out there. Those are all really great examples of VR titles that can be kind of a guide in your experience. Atlanta had another question here that caught my eye, I thought, too. Or maybe not. Maybe I was thinking of somebody else.
You have a comment here. Do all object scripts have to run to completion before a frame is considered completely rendered? You
Right.
mentioned you're going to answer that, but you put a link as well.
Yeah. So when you're rendering a frame in a game engine, there are a lot of things that kind of happen in different orders. So like one of the first things is like any new object that got created this frame, we're going to bring that online and make sure that it's all hooked up right and functioning. And then once all those kind of setup processes happen, then we go through the entire world and we say, hey, we're going to update this entire simulation. And so we, every object kind of has a chance to do something in response to the passage of time. And then the next step is like, okay, so we've prioritized these specific objects to happen late in the, actually, well, I skipped something. There's also a physics simulation that's kind of running alongside on fixed updates that is a way for the physics engine to do kind of more accurate calculations over time and to simulate not just from the beginning of one frame to the next frame, but multiple updates over that period of time. And then finally, what I talked about, the late update happens. And then once the late update has finished, we've now finished updating the entire simulation. The state of the simulation does not change after that. And then we immediately go into what is called the render phase. And so this is sort of like, we've now updated everything to correspond to time. We're going to start drawing these things. And so the renderer goes through the scene and handles transparencies and handles kind of projecting that geometry onto the near clip plane. If you have a RTX 3080, maybe you do a little ray tracing, you bounce some light around the scene, you like update some glass or some crystal or something that makes your water look really great. And then after that, we've now produced an image of the scene. We can do something called post-processing, where we maybe adjust the color mapping or anything that you could do in Photoshop. You can now adjust that image just as like a flat 2D image, and then we project that onto the display hardware. So that whole process happens in that order, and so that simulation step in the middle where we're updating the simulation is where the update is happening. And yeah, that all finishes before we move to the render frame.
Okay, probably time for just a couple more questions. Jason here, is there a good template Unity package that is targeted for Quest 2 with hand interactions? Something I could get from the Unity asset store or somewhere? I
wish there was. So I do a lot of development in Unreal, and in Unreal, I highly recommend VR expansion. It's super powerful, multi-purpose template that basically base everything I do in VR off of VR expansion. In Unity, it has to be a little bit more piecemeal. There are a lot of different great pieces. More recently, the XR input and the XR there's some acronym that starts with XR, that Unity has made a package which is XR support. Those are great foundational layers, and I'm really happy that Unity is sort of like building this stack up, because a lot of these things should really be kind of standard pieces of the game engine. But on top of that, there are a lot of features like you want to do IK around your fingers so that when you grab, when I hold my phone, I hold it differently than when I hold this coffee mug, right? Like the way my fingers wrap around these different objects is wildly different. So you can't just have canned animations that move the fingers. You have to do some inverse kinematics. And so there's a package on the asset store that has a really great finger gripping stuff for VR. And so you're going to want to start to use the Unity XR foundation, but then you're going to want to layer on some additional packages. And as far as I know, like it's too, like you're just going to have to shop around for the features that are most relevant to your project and stack those on top. And I hope that as we move forward, more and more of this kind of gets glommed together into these larger foundational packages like VR expansion in Unreal, where you kind of have this like starting point, and then it's a bit more, it's more about specializing on top of that starting point rather than building your starting point out of modular pieces.
I think our last question for now, but like I said earlier, is bring these to the Slack channel and we can continue the conversation. We've had a couple questions that I'll just kind of blend into one in terms of how strong should coding be if people want to be a VR designer. They've got the design skills, but they're not so strong on the coding. What types of positions are available for them, or should they really look into honing those coding skills as well?
Yeah. So right now is a very exciting time to be a VR designer, because so I started in VR in 2016, and prior to 2016, we were all on dev kits and solving these really hard like USB driver problem stuff, and I was like, I don't want any of that, because I don't want to spend my day figuring out how to install the SDK. Like that's not fun for me. I'm a very technical designer. I have a computer science background. I've done a lot of professional engineering. And so back in 2016, we kind of got to the point where Unity and Unreal kind of natively supported VR in a way that you just install this game engine, you check the VR box, and you're making VR apps, right? And so at that point, there was still a lot of technical problems to solve, a lot of, figuring, like it took me a long time before I learned about late updates. And there was not just a drop down where you're like, yeah, make this late update at that point. You had to actually write code to be like, do this later than this other stuff. And so that was a really good time for me to get into. But now in 2020, 4 years later, we are getting to the point where there are starting to be a lot of 3D prototyping tools. You can open up Tilt Brush, you can open up Google Blocks, you can actually like be a designer who's pretty lightweight on technical skills. I think you probably still want to learn to code at least a little bit. It's always valuable, whether you're an artist or a designer or a producer. Knowing a little bit of C# is going to make you a better whatever you are than knowing no C#. And so a lot of larger teams, like you can't really have a design team before you have an engineering team, but a lot of big companies now have established enough of a VR engineering team that they can support a VR design team. And so a lot of pure VR roles are opening up, and there's a lot more exploration in that space. As we solve these technical problems, it becomes more and more possible for people with less technical skills to make their ideas realized. That said, this is still very much a frontier. If you're getting in it now, you are a pioneer. Learning how Unity works, being able to prototype your own ideas, and like cause this stuff to happen on your own is like kind of the reality of where VR is at right now. There are not really WYSIWYG editors for these interactions, so you do have to build them yourself. But luckily, it's gotten to the point where you're building these interactions that you want to demonstrate out of modular pieces and not out of whole cloth. So it's a great time to begin exploring that and start building those technical skills and understanding some of the underlying technical trade-offs in our design choices.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, well, I think we're going to close up there, but definitely keep connected in the Slack. We're happy to answer any questions. Eric drops in there occasionally as well, so you might even get a chance to chat directly with him. I do want to give a heads up. We are having 2 more workshops this week, both on Thursday. One at 1 p.m. Eastern time. I believe that's correct. No, sorry, 3 p.m. Eastern time. 3 p.m. Eastern time is HoloLens, and 7 p.m. Eastern time will be a intro to XR interaction toolkit, which for those of you who are not coders, that might be a really interesting workshop for you. The whole point is to have to build things without code. So yeah, check those out. They're on our website, also on our social media, and I will be sharing them in the Slack channel as well. Thank you so much, Eric. Everybody clap virtually.
No
Yay,
problem.
wonderful job.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll see you next time. And as for the rest of you, thank you so much. Have a wonderful night. We'll send you all of the materials shortly later this evening.